Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to this webinar on concept to MVP to launch. Our presenter today is Mikel Lindsaar, who is the founder and CEO of Reinteractive. So Mikel is well known in the Ruby on Rails community as a blogger. He is also the author of Mail, which is the Ruby email handling library, and he's known for his extensive work on the Ruby on Rails action mailer component. Mikel is the author of the book Why Rails, and he will be launching his next book, Confident Software, early next year. So welcome, Mikel.
Excellent. So concept to MVP, how to launch your project and maintain your sanity. In this webinar, we'll go for about an hour, a little bit less. Please feel free at any time to ask questions, and you can just pop them into the little questions box, and then we'll answer them straight away. So, who am I? For those of you that don't know, I've founded Reinteractive in 2010, delivered hundreds of successful software projects. We've grown the staff for 40 years, 54% growth last year alone, 40 staff, sorry, 54% growth last year. We've got billions of requests per month running through our Ops Care platform on Amazon, and author of Why Rails and Confident Software, which is coming out, and also the author of the Mail Gem. We've got almost over 99 million downloads now, so we're almost hitting 100 million, so that's pretty awesome. So concept to MVP. This is something that a lot of my clients ask me, and they want to know, how do we actually go from where we are in terms of, an MVP or a concept, and how do we actually get to being launched? Like, how do we actually launch this thing? How do we get it to a point where people are using it, we're earning income, and all that sort of stuff? So this is what I want to go over today, and it'll be interesting. So first off, when I'm talking to clients, I ask them, well, what is an MVP? And I get back a lot of different viewpoints on what an MVP would be designed or thought of as. An MVP, a lot of people think that it's all of the things or a few of the things, or it has to be badly designed, or all sorts of stuff comes up in what an MVP is. So what I'd like to do is, first off, let's just have a look at what that word, or those three words, what does that phrase actually mean? What does minimum viable product actually mean? And minimum viable product obviously is MVP. So the way I like looking at these sorts of things is I go forward and I, first off, get an understanding of what the actual words mean themselves. So let's just do that. So we've got minimum, and in the dictionary, if you look up minimum, it says the least or smallest amount or quantity possible, attainable, or required. And it comes from Latin, minimus, which means least. If you then look at the next word, which is viable, it is capable of working successfully and feasible. And this comes from French, from vie and life, and from Latin vita. And this is an interesting one, because for a product or an application to be a minimum viable product, it needs to be able to live. It needs to be able to continue, otherwise it's not viable. It would pass away. Product. So an article or substance that's manufactured or refined for sale. So this is a key point. You have to be able to generate goodwill or something back from it. And it comes from the Latin, something produced. So if you had a look at what a minimum viable product was then, you could call it the smallest item that can be produced and successfully sold at a profit. And this would be what you're after when you're trying to produce an MVP. So when you look at that and you go, well, what would my idea or what would my product actually be in terms of an MVP? You're looking for the most concise thing that you can build that you can actually sell. And this might not be simple. If you're building a car manufacturing plant, the minimum viable product is a plant that will actually produce a car. And there's 1,000,001 steps involved in that. If you're building a social network, the minimum viable product of a social network these days is like 300 million people on it or something crazy. So you really have to pick your battles when you're going into this MVP. It's not just the software. You need to work out and focus on what you're actually going to build. So let's have a look at a couple of things that are not a minimum viable product. So the first one would be every feature wanted, right? So if you look at every feature wanted, that's not the smallest item that can be produced and successfully sold at a profit. So if you were going to produce every feature wanted, you wouldn't be producing an MVP. If you are exceeding your available budget, so you're going, well, I want to build this in 2 weeks and I want 20 developers on it and that sort of thing, well, that can't be produced because you don't have enough money for it. And if you're designing something that was broken or badly designed, it didn't look good, or some of the features weren't actually doing what they were meant to do, well, you're not going to be able to successfully sell that, because even if the client looks past everything else and just tries to use it anyway and it doesn't work, well, then you can't successfully sell it. And then the last thing to look at is it architected for billions of users, or is it over architected? Is it using the latest and greatest of everything? Well, that might still produce what you need, but will you be able to then produce it at a profit? So each of these steps is something that you really need to look at when you're creating an MVP, because if you go too deep into any one of those things, you're going to end up with some part of that definition violated. So we'll just go through that again. If you do every feature wanted, well, the smallest item that can be produced, so it's not going to do that. And you can see that each of these steps and parts will violate some part of that definition underneath. It's pretty key that you have a look at that and make sure that you're not trying to over-architect something. So how do you actually go from a concept to an MVP? How do you actually launch that? Well, the key thing to do is find out what your concept can exchange. And what do I mean by exchange? Well, exchange would be the process of giving a product to someone outside your activity and in return getting something valuable, such as money, consideration, goodwill, or support. So if your product is a car sales website, right? The exchange that you're giving would be the right car at the right price matched up with the right user so that they can then go and buy that car. And every product that you produce has some exchange value. There is some aspect of it that allows you to exchange it with somebody else so that you will get something in return. And that's actually the viability of the MVP, or the viability of any product is, can you actually exchange it with someone else? Will someone pay you for this? And that's a really key aspect. Will you be able to go out and find someone who will give you money or time or something like that and give it back to you for some sort of a profit? So if you've got your exchange worked out, or if you know that you need to use exchange, and that's the key point, well, the next thing to have a look at is, well, what's the key thing that your product can exchange? So if you're building some application, and I mean, if there's someone online and you have any questions about this, ask me, and I will, give some advice on this line and see if we can help work it out. But what is the key thing your concept can exchange? This is really important to work out when you're doing an MVP, because it's so easy to get lost in the 1001 features that get built up around an MVP. And as you're building the project, there's all sorts of aspects that get pushed in, and you want this feature and that feature. And we've got to make sure that the homepage is editable by the marketing department so that we can rapidly change our marketing at any time. And all of these features start creeping into the application. And unless you've identified, well, what is actually the key thing that our application or concept does, you're going to end up in a situation where you're going to overrun your budget massively, and that's not going to work. So it's a really important point to identify what is the key thing that your application does that every other competitor or other application doesn't do. And if you can get that worked out, you're going to have a lot more focus. One of the ways you can work this out is, what's the key problem your concept's actually going to solve for your customers? Is it that it gives them a view into something that would otherwise be unviewable? Or is it that they can understand something about their business that they couldn't before? Or they can now, search for things that they didn't even know they needed to search, or that this product does something? These concepts of MVP apply equally well to the product field as the services field. You can have an MVP of accounting. An MVP of accounting might be bookkeeping, or it might be you as one person going out and giving some financial advice to someone, which is an absolute MVP that you can deliver because it's just you. Or there's any number of aspects that you can use for this. So you want to identify what the key problem is. Once you've identified the key problem, you want to have a look at, well, how will your concepts solve that key problem for your customers? And of course, within this, your customers need to have this problem, right? So going out to some of your prospective customers and saying, what problems do you have around this topic or subject? How can I solve them for you? What could I do to make it better? Or if you already know that, going out and talking to them and saying, hey, I just built blah, or I'm just about to build blah that will do A, B, C. Would you pay $15, $10, $100, $1,000 a month for that? Would that be worthwhile to you to have that? How much would it benefit you? How much would it be, productive for you? So working out this key concept, what actually is the problem that you will solve with this product? And then, of course, there's the aspect of why will your customers want to even spend their time or money buying your product or using your website? What benefit are they going to get out of it? How often are they going to need to use it? The more often they need to use it, the more you'll be able to charge for it, because the more valuable it is, the more part of their life it is. And, the more of their problem it solves. Facebook as an application solves a problem that not many people thought they had. It's not necessarily a good problem, but it's a problem. They feel like they need to talk about themselves or be, showing their life or trying to keep up with the Joneses or whatever it is that drives them. It's a problem for them. And that's why people use it so much. It's very, very interesting for them. It solves something that they want. There are other applications out there which do similar things, like Xero solves a problem. And for me, with our company, so I spend a lot of time with it and make sure that it's up to date, and we never let that subscription fee go away. There's a lot of focus on that. Once you've got those things, you really need to understand the key idea, as in that key aspect of your business is the MVP. Nothing else is the MVP. So if you take what your product can do, and maybe it can do, like the ideal scene of your product has like 50 major features, you want to have a look at those 50 and go, well, what are the 3 features that actually make this product do what this product does? And if you can really understand those, you're going to make and be a lot saner in developing an MVP. The key that you do find out about this key idea, it is your MVP. It's not, it's not just some esoteric thing. This is what you want to build. Sometimes clients will come to us and they'll have a list of 100 items of features, and they're all critical, So sitting down with them and going, well, what's actually the key of this project? What is it that identifies it and separates it from all the other competition? How does this one idea make your product better than everyone else's? And by finding that out, then you can find out what your MVP is. It doesn't mean you have to stop at the MVP. It's just that you want to build that first. And once you've got that built, maybe you can get some trial customers on and then start iterating on it and building other features into it. So the interesting thing about this, though, is when you identify that key thing, you might find out that your key thing is actually very complex. MVPs are not necessarily cheap. And this is an important point. Users can find out that over the years, they've been cheated, or not cheated, treated. They've been treated with highly complex, beautiful applications and interfaces that they use all the time. And these are highly designed and beautiful and all this sort of stuff. So rightly or wrongly, they've come to expect the same from any online software they use. So building an MVP has not become really cheaper over time. The height of the bar that you have to leap over to successfully launch is always getting pushed higher and higher and higher. When you're developing web applications these days, you're expected to have, mobile-friendly version, and the normal version needs to be able to load fast, it needs to be beautifully designed. And you compare that with version 1 of Basecamp from 10 years ago, and modern applications usually are designed way better than that ever was. So MVPs are not always cheap, but they always have to be concise to be an MVP. and working out what that concise aspect is, working out what is the key idea that you want to push. That's what's going to create a MVP that will be successful, because the people that use it will understand what it's for. In fact, looking at this difference between, you know, how much features versus concise and whether or not an MVP is cheap or not, the best MVPs are actually beautifully designed. And they're created in such a way that you land on the website and you just understand what you need to do. You just get it, you can see, and you go, okay, I know that I need to do blah. And on the front of the page, it says exactly what this product does. You know, the worst websites out there at the moment that are SaaS startups, software as a service startups that are launching, that have on their homepage, we create synergy between blah and blah and blah, and it's like 15 marketing words all together, and you're going, yeah, but what is it you do? You know, why would I buy your product? The best MVPs are beautiful. You land on their website and you just understand what they do, and you go, yeah, I can see, I actually need that. Let's try it out. And you target that to a very specific market, and you go for that market, and you get those people signed up, and then you can get more money building through the company. So how do you get a balance between concise and over the top and beautiful and not beautiful and all this sort of stuff? Well, to give you an idea around that, I want to just talk to MVPs and some of the key datums that you're going to need to handle as you're moving into that. And before I jump into that, are there any questions from anyone in the audience about what I've already gone over, and you know, if there's anything that they want to ask? Otherwise, if not, that's also fine. Okay, good. So how do we actually get a balance? How do we balance between building the best, beautiful, feature-rich MVP and something that's not going to be survivable, livable, or anything else? And the key thing here, oh, the first question, just one sec. A question to fit into the webinar when relevant. Good. Please post away, Paul, when you're ready. How do we get that balance? Well, the first axiom of software development from a book that I've got called Confident Software, and some of you may have actually seen this one before, is that desired features will always exceed a valuable budget. This is a key datum with regards to developing an MVP. The number of features that you want to put into an MVP will always be more than you have available budget of time and money. Doesn't matter what size company you are, it's going to happen this way. And this is something that you really need to focus on. It will help you to focus on that key aspect of software development. And you have a look at the graph that comes up here, that features, budget, and quality, pick any two, right? So before I said that MVPs should be beautiful and they should be beautifully designed. Well, design is actually a feature. I'll talk about that in a minute. But you can see here that if you went for a small number of features, like the most number of features you can with the most quality, that's going to be your best bet. But the problem, if you do that, if you go most features with most quality, then your budget's going to go crazy. So what you want to do is you want to balance those things together. You want to have a good number of features, but not too many, as high quality as you can afford, and fit that all within your budget. And really the only way to do this is to decide on, you know, which features you're going to build. So you want to focus on a really tiny number of well-executed features. And this is, again, very important. And the best projects that we've worked on have focused on these tiny number of features. And tiny is obviously relative. Depending on your budget available, depending on the size of the product, depending on what the minimum viable product of your project actually is, will determine how many tiny features or how many features you can actually put in, and whether it's tiny or not. You know, sometimes, like when we built a project for the Adelaide Fringe Festival, we built their whole artist and venue booking system. The minimum viable product of that was quite a lot of features, because we had to coordinate thousands of artists with thousands of venues and get a complex map going. And the truth is, it was either do all of that or not do it at all, because we had to develop enough parts of that system and make it all work together to even make it viable. But once that was done, it was viable and it continued to deliver value to that organization. That was not a cheap project. but it was the minimum viable product. And this is a thing, you know, some people go, well, a minimum viable product has to be under $20,000. Well, the truth is it's not. Sometimes you can get away with that. Much more often though, you'll find that MVP costs quite a lot of money. And that's where partnering with a firm, be it us, Reinteractive, or anyone else out there that you know and trust, to give you some ideas of pricing is very critical. So if you're going to focus on a tiny number of well-executed features, you need to decide which features. What are we actually going to develop here? So the first thing that you can do to do that is have a look at some prototype and user testing. This is really empowering to developing out an MVP, because what you can do is you can start with a prototype, get a wireframe in place, get it in front of users, and then start culling down the features until you find the minimum set that's actually going to produce a viable product. So doing this is really important. Get someone to do a UX and prototype service, and then get it in front of users and make them cull it. I just got a question in. I'm just quickly going to read it. Okay, good. So Paul just gave me a question, and Paul, I'm actually going to answer that a little bit later. So I'll speak with you soon. Okay, good. So prototyping and user testing. This is a very important part. Get in there and build out the wireframe. The other thing that a wireframe does, even going out and looking at your users and talking with your users and showing them the wireframe and say, hey, if we built this and it did this, would you use it? They'll get excited and they'll say, yeah, absolutely. Or no, we don't want to use it. And then you go, well, okay, now I know, now I'm not going to build it. But the other thing it does is when you start developing, it gives you and the development team a common application image, like a common picture to look at and work towards and build towards. And then you can have conversations with your developers. You can go, well, you know, on the wireframe page 4, you can see when I click this and that drop down happens, there's this menu, that's what I want implemented over here, and can you make that happen? And everyone's looking at the same thing. It's not everyone's got their own image in their heads. So prototyping and user testing becomes very, very valuable there. The next thing that you need to know is that design and good looking design is a feature. It is something that you need to accommodate for within your MVP. Good design doesn't just happen. It's built and it's created. And you really need to look at investing in design, because today's users expect awesome design. They've been spoiled by companies with millions to spend on design and UI. And all those companies that spend all these millions on it make it a lot harder for the startups, because now you need to make something that looks as good as whatever other product is being used out there. So this sort of design is a feature, and that design of making it work well also works back to that user experience and user interface. And that's where you'd want to start on the design path and make sure that the design gets rolling on that aspect. Next thing you need to look at is picking your battles. Minimizing your features to do one thing awesomely will allow you to complete and build a compelling product. So if you're going to put a lot of development in along a lot of development fronts, you're going to produce probably a mediocre solution to a lot of problems. And that's not going to make your application very compelling. And users will go, yeah, well, yeah, you know, I'm using that site, but, you know, it sort of is the same as this other one, and that other one sort of does it a bit better, and that other one does this other thing really well, and this one sort of only half does that, and that sort of thing. What you're better off doing is having a product that handles one thing exceptionally well, and then the user goes, these guys and girls just do things far beyond anything else I've used. They're just the experts at it, so I'm going to use them for this. And this other product over there, yeah, it does a couple of other things, but I want to use this thing for this one topic or problem that I'm trying to solve, because it does it really well. Now, if you can get customers that are like that, you're going to get more customers on that one major product, and then you can start fleshing it out and adding more features and building it out from there. And this is a really important way to develop out an MVP. Another part of picking your battles is looking at tried and true over new and shiny, which is actually the 8th axiom of my Confident Software book. You quite often get situations where developers and and teams will want to use the latest and greatest piece of software or open source software or whatever to build a product because everyone's doing it, and Facebook are using this thing, so therefore we must use this same thing as Facebook. Well, the truth is that probably you ain't going to need it. YAG Nee. It's a term that developers throw around to each other all the time. But because that every implementation decision in terms of architecture or what software you're going to use is another feature. So pick a team that you can trust to have delivered again and again with a tried and proven technology and stick with it. When you're developing an MVP, you don't want your budget being spent on developers learning the latest and greatest tech. This is really important. Don't get keyword happy. You want to focus in on things that work and are known to work and go from there. This is actually one of the reasons why at Reinteractive, for example, we just stick to and focus on Ruby on Rails. We've had many pushes to us to go to this latest and greatest software or that latest and greatest software, and we keep saying no. And it's not that we can't do it. I'm sure we could find developers to do it, but we know that within a certain amount of income, we can develop and build a certain size product, and we really understand that technology. It doesn't surprise us, and our clients aren't necessarily paying for our developers to learn and make mistakes on brand new technology. Let the new technology get evolved by someone else. Let someone else spend the money on that. You want to focus on getting your product launched. The next key thing on building out an MVP is sticking to your knitting. This is the 9th axiom of confident software. What do I mean by that? Well, don't try and reinvent the wheel. So when you're deploying or getting products launched, go with a cloud provider. AWS, we use that all the time with our ops care service. And don't try and build out your own deployment stacks and continuous integration servers and software stacks and all this sort of stuff. Find a partner that can launch it and get it working and just stick with them and just get it done. You don't want to be spending your money. Again, you've got enough money to spend on your feature development and your design and the build out and finding clients and getting them launched and getting them attracted and all this sort of thing. So make sure that you're not reinventing the wheel on this sort of thing. I guess the last main aspect here is to focus. Focus on what you're building and make sure that what you are building is what you are building. You want to make sure your MVP is very targeted on the key problem that you're trying to solve, targeted on the key problem that the user's experiencing, and really targeted on building a beautiful experience that's going to pull people in and keep them attached to it and keep them going on it. So a lot of these aspects are covered in the book, Confident Software, will be coming out next year. And I do obviously want to ask some questions and get on there. This has gone a little quicker than I thought because I thought we might have a couple more questions, but that's okay. That means everyone gets an early minute, which is exciting. But I do have a couple of questions here. So while I'm answering this one, please throw in any other questions or anything about anything that you wanted answered that you didn't feel like I went over in this in the slides, and I'll spend some more time going over that. So the first question I had here, let me just read it, is okay, I can't make this small, one sec. Okay, a client went down the PHP route about 10 years ago and has a commercial product which is being sold, but it's hit a development dead end, terrible design, poor code, loss of key developers, I wasn't involved, etc. He's thinking about rebuilding from scratch. So this raises the MVP question. He can't necessarily recreate the entire existing system right from the start. Any thoughts on this kind of situation? Okay, yeah, that sort of situation is a lot of fun. One of the ways that I would go about doing that in terms of rebuilding or having a project that's hit a complete dead end and how do you build it out from there is I take it as an opportunity instead of a cost. If it's really old, and you said it's 10 years ago. Okay, right, yeah. So I'd even come in and go, okay, let's get a user experience team in and build out a prototype of what the system should be. And like we offer this service, we have a UX specialist and she'll come out and talk to the clients and do all sorts of things. So what you can do is go talk to the clients, go brief them and say, hey, we're looking at relaunching this product and making it up to date. We want to build out a new feature set for you and see what it's like. So if you are going to go the rewrite route, rewrite it in such a way that the clients are going to get a lot of benefit and a lot of feedback for it, and they'll be very happy. If you can't rewrite it, then what you need to do is start replacing parts of it bit by bit by bit until you eventually replace the code with much more maintainable code and get that done. We're actually doing that for a client right now that has an old PHP app that's been very successful, and we're actually replacing it bit by bit with a Rails application that's much more architected and better designed, and building it out from there. So this is something that you can absolutely do. Does that answer your question there, Paul? Perl, not PHP. Well, same thing. Another product there. So yeah, getting out, and you have two options. You can either build from scratch, or and use that as an opportunity to really build out new features and get client engagement and get them working on it and get them loving it, getting those users loving it. Okay, good. Any other questions from anyone? I think the key thing with an MVP, and the way to not lose your sanity if you want to take away on it, is really decide what's the actual focus. What are you focused on doing here? What is the problem you're trying to solve? They are the key things. If you can figure out that problem, then you can build it out, and you can focus on that as you're building it. And then when new features come in, you need to evaluate them based on, does this solve my problem? And if it doesn't solve the problem of your customer, then it doesn't get built yet. It can get built later. There's always time to build more stuff. Okay, another question. What do you think of the lean startup culture and the catchphrase such as pivot early and pivot often? Yeah, absolutely. But the problem with pivot early and pivot often, it assumes you have an unlimited budget to a degree, because every time you pivot, you're going to lose some work. So the way that I would recommend you do that, because at the same time, if you're working on a dead horse that's not actually going to produce anything, you may as well pivot, because you're going to get potentially a better option. One of the ways you can minimize having to pivot, though, is doing some good user testing, getting out there and talking with users, showing them the product that you've already got in wireframes, getting them involved with it, getting them even to buy the product before you start. There's no reason why you can't go out to someone and say, hey, we're going to build this, we're in the process, we've got an early bird special. If you want the first 12 months, instead of $1,000, it's going to be $500 if you sign up today, and start getting out there and getting sales happening. Quite often the pivoting out of a project onto the next one is just a very strong indicator that the person really didn't do any user surveys to begin with. So when they went to sell it, none of the clients wanted it. Of course, there are exceptions to that. That's not always the case. Like Instagram was actually born out of a game sharing site, and they figured out that people actually wanted to be able to share photos instead. So lots of things like that can happen, but you want to not rely on the pivoting. Instead, try and get out there and make it so that you're building a product that people want. And if you know that and you've got sales, then you can get more sales, and then you just need to keep working on it and keep marketing it. Okay, the next question. What's the right time to start to think about a scalable architecture? Well, the truth here is that the right time to really start working on a scalable architecture is when you have a scaling problem. However, having said that, if you build it on a stack that can scale, you're not going to have a problem generally. So if you build it on top of AWS, or you build it on top of a cloud provider, you're generally going to be okay with scale. And just make sure the development team that you pick, or the people you work with, know how to scale, and they've built applications that can scale. We had a client that had an application, and we built it for a small number of users, and they came back 2 years later and they just exploded with use, and all their pages were taking 45 seconds to load or a minute to load, and it was a real problem. And because of the way we built it, it only took a developer a week to optimize that, and things were loading in seconds again. And because it was on OpsCare, we could just add a few more servers in the meantime, and things just worked out. So scaling is not really a problem you want to start working with from day one. If you know that you're going to have 100,000 users or 200,000 users or even 1,000 users every second on the application or something like that, then absolutely tell the developers, and they can handle some obvious scaling problems. But generally, a product's going to take a lot longer than you think to get into a scaling problem territory. Another one. And for user testing, we could not get enough users to test. Yes, this is hard. Finding users to test is a key aspect of trying to get this thing done. So we have helped customers help identify this, but really getting users to test is almost a sales pitch in itself. And knowing that you have users to test and finding users to test is a good indicator that someone's going to want your product. So if you're not being able to find enough users to test, then generally means something about the sales pitch is wrong. And the sales process probably needs improving. And it's a hard pill to swallow, that one. But generally, if you don't have users to test, then you need to look at, well, is anyone actually going to buy the product? Or what about the sales pitch can be improved so that I actually find users that do want to test it? Okay, another question. With so much growth at Reinteractive, how do you stay sane but manage to keep the growth going? Thanks, Daniel. Good question. Well, the truth is that I've built up a team, and the team is really awesome. I always write policy for any situation that comes up so that I only have to make that decision once. I put it into policy and I get it out to people, and then those people implement it. But that's a subject for another discussion at another time, not so much on this one. But yeah, Daniel, if you do want some more information on that, feel free to email me, and I'll more than happy have a chat with you on the phone. All right, everyone. Are there any more questions? If not, we'll end off 10, 15 minutes early. If you do have any questions on any of this, you are more than welcome to get hold of me via email, and Rochelle can point you in my direction. And it's also on the website, and you can get hold of me. And I'm more than happy to answer individual questions and discuss further if you have any other ideas or things that you want resolved. Oh, there's one more question. Your team is Rails focused, but they can write JavaScript as required? Yes, absolutely. So when we say Rails focused, we mean Rails as a product includes the database layer, which is SQL, Postgres. We use mainly a little bit of MySQL, but then focused on Rails as the driver that builds the whole application. And then the front end is obviously HTML, CSS, JavaScript. That's also needed. But what I don't mean is that, we don't build all of our applications in the latest React framework or things like this. So we focus on Rails because we know we're going to get that product out. Another question, is it hard to integrate mapping into Rails apps? I'm a beginner, like Uber. No, Rails can handle, I think Uber's even built with Rails from memory, or at least Rails is part of the stack. But yeah, you can absolutely put mapping into Rails. That's not a problem whatsoever. And if you have a specific question on that, Stephen, get hold of us via our website contact form, and one of us will be in touch with you and help you flesh that out. All right, everybody, thank you very much for talking to us or listening to me and asking me questions. There's some great questions there. That was really good. Thank you very much. And I hope you all have a fantastic weekend, and I hope I can get to talk to you soon. Thank you very much.